Hello, guys, and welcome to the MSC Performance Podcast, Season 5, Episode 2. If you're watching on YouTube, you might notice the hot new upgrades, new camera, new microphone, and more importantly, a new guest, permanent co-guest, Kitty Eyelash.
Thank you so much. Hi, Luke. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Super excited about this setup. We need to give credits though before we start.
Yeah, credit to credit to Matthew Lanter, under Matt Lanter on Instagram, if you want to give him a follow. He's been here at Work Experience, and we've been utilising the youth, and we've got exploiting the youth, not in a weird way, just. But now we've got a new setup. We've had some cool videos, and yeah, he's done some really good stuff with the class as well.
And he's replacing me next week.
In 2 years when he's got his level 3. So thank you, Matthew. Our last podcast was on how to get through dry January, how that's going to affect your training. This one we're going to talk about recovery. Kitty, you said that a few people have been asking about different recovery protocols, etc.
Yeah, so in the past 2 weeks, I had a few conversations with Barbell Club members mainly, and Metcon members as well, because I think, and this is a conversation we had, I think, when I recorded my first podcast, is that in this kind of population we work with, there's a problem of overtraining and things like that. And we were just kind of having a conversation about optimizing your training and everything else around it as well, so that overtraining doesn't occur. So I find it quite difficult when people just want to do as much as they can. They want to do the Barbell Club sessions 3 times. They want to do 3-4 Metcons a week. And then they like doing things outside as well, whether that's rock climbing, running, yoga, things like that. And there's not enough space in the week for that. So they found it quite hard to recover, really. So I thought this would be a great conversation to have today and help people with that.
Yeah, I think it's quite a unique problem working in the gyms, where the problem is actually telling people to stop doing exercise.
I know.
For the bulk part of it, you encourage your people to do a little bit more. You're trying to get them to do more activity out of the gym. But I think because the people that tend to gravitate towards MSC, and maybe also the people that listen to the podcast that aren't members of MSC, tend to be really interested in training, and they find themselves just adding levels and levels. I think you mentioned about like the Barbell Club guys. A lot of them haven't done much strength training in the past, or maybe done a little bit. All of a sudden, they're adding Barbell Club on top of already a really tough amount of work that they're doing with like Metcon classes or something else, and it's very tough to recover from that amount of work. So I guess the first thing is just to balance everything as best as you can, and something has to give at some point. But I guess when we go into like the more nuanced stuff, like what are people doing, or what should we be doing to recover, is what we're going to hopefully break down today.
Yes.
Fantastic. Do you want to kick us off?
So there was one thing that I kind of wanted to bring up at the beginning, which was the fact that there is a little bit of a difference between men and women in terms of recovery. And I brought a couple of papers, to be honest. So there was a systematic review done quite recently, actually. I think it was 2021, that was talking about exercise-induced muscle soreness, or DOMS, and it mentioned that in different phases of the menstrual cycle, in menstruating women, we recover differently, and there was a significant difference. Now, in terms of the menstrual cycle, if we assume that a normal menstrual cycle is 28 days, we would classify the first 14 days as the follicular phase. Then we've got ovulation at 14 days. And then the next 14 days is the luteal phase. And this paper found that during the so it would be the follicular phase when menstruation occurs, muscle damage response tends to be higher. So it might be a good idea to lower the training load at that time of the menstrual cycle. And recovery periods let me just double check this. in the late follicular phase, which would be just before ovulation. So that's like day 10 to 13 of the cycle. And the mid luteal phase, that's after ovulation, I would say day 20 of the cycle. But that's a good idea to push there, because strength seems to be a little bit higher, and recovery after resistance training seems to be better. So that's an important thing.
With those, with that information, would you proactively program someone around that cycle, or would you kind of just ask them to be like proactive and make adjustments based off how they feel? So if they're coming in and finding that their recovery feels poor, you just give them like a recommendation to be flexible and maybe adjust the volume or the intensity as needed, or would you proactively program differently depending on the part of the cycle that you're in?
I would personally just make recommendations, because it's not just an individual matter, but it's also varies from cycle to cycle. So you can't generalize, and I don't think you can make adjustments based on that, or programming based on that. So it would be a case of, let's pull back a little bit, or let's push a little bit more at this phase, and monitor it on an individual level, meaning the athletes are recommended to track their cycles, check premenstrual syndrome as well, so if there's any pain, bloating, things like that, and then just make adjustments from there.
Great. How much of a difference would those recommendations be compared to like just the general recommendation of being flexible with your training? So like on a given day you might fluctuate with strength 5%. Do you think it would be like, I don't know, another 5% on top of that? Or I know it's hard to answer this question, but just like...
Yeah, I think that's a really tough one to answer, and I'm going to come back to this and you're going to be like, fuck's sake. But I'm going to say it's individual.
Very individual, of course.
It really depends on that specific person, and
Yeah, I guess, well, this is why when we do...
What do you reckon? Sorry to cut you.
Out of everyone I train a lot of women, and people that have a cycle, very woke. I have never had to make any bigger adjustments than RPE to anyone. So like there's people that say like on certain days they feel weaker, certain days they feel stronger. Absolutely. From my understanding of the research, like it seems to affect aerobic more than like maximal strength. So like the people that I typically work with, they don't have that much of an effect. Outside of like my normal recommendations, where if I give someone a weight to hit, it might be 2 to 5% difference between the low and the higher end. I've never really had to program much outside of that, to be honest. So it seems that for the populations I work with, like I'll have people that sometimes go underneath that weight, but there's never anyone that's like, these 2 weeks I always feel terrible and I need a 10% drop. So outside of my usual flexibility, I've never had to make much more adjustment than that.
And I also think that it also depends on the fact of whether someone's a more like competitive athlete or someone who's just recreationally trains like 2 or 3 times a week. Because when we're talking about recreational athletes, it's more so participation in sports, so whether I'm going to go or not. Whereas in competitive sports, it's more like the percentages and RPEs and things like that.
And a recent example, actually, I was training with someone that was really struggling. They were saying they were feeling bloated, the lower back was a little bit sore. And if they weren't a competitive lifter, you might think, actually, just go home today and come back another day maybe. But they pushed on and actually had a really good session, but probably uncomfortable doing it. I don't think that's going to do anything long term, but yeah, like it's not fun doing that actual session. So if it didn't matter that much, you could go home and just come back another day. But because they were a competitive athlete, they wanted to keep to their structure. They got through the session and actually did okay. But do you have to be doing that if you're just recreational? I don't know. So yeah. There you go then. So straight away, differences between the men and the women. But on that note, though, there's a lot of stuff that still, is for both populations. So I guess if you get stuck in with the low-hanging fruit, the main things that people should be focusing on, I guess we're going to break it down into like the overall what you can be doing to optimize your recovery. We're going to talk about things on like an annual scale or like a macro scale. So if you've got a competition, what you could be doing at the start of that prep, what you could be doing towards the end of that prep. We're going to look at the mesocycle and looking at different weeks where you might be having deloads, intro weeks, when to utilize those. We're going to look at the actual individual week, the microcycle, so your high days, your low days, and talk about like using your recovery days in there. And then also what you can be doing in the session to improve your recovery, and then some other little things that you can do if you really want to get the last like 1 or 2% out of stuff. So should we kick off with the big 2 or the big 3?
Yes, please. I'll let you lead
fantastic. Brilliant. I think if you ask anyone, and people already know this, but the main 2 I would say are sleep and nutrition. For anyone that's athletic performance, there's a million studies out there. We've got a couple in front of us now, looking at the difference in performance when you have good sleep versus bad sleep. But then also there's what's quite interesting is like, is your good sleep your baseline? And bad sleep's just bad sleep, or do you like optimize it when you're getting good sleep? There's lots of studies looking at good sleep plus like additional top-up sleep, and they seem to have either like a no benefit or like a small benefit as well. So it just seems that like getting good sleep and good quality sleep in is massive for your performance, but just avoiding bad sleep is huge, and just trying to optimize your sleep as best as you can if you're an athlete is huge.
I've got just an interesting statistic here that sleeping 5 hours one night may reduce strength performance by approximately 3%. Now, if you just think about it as a one-off occasion, you're just like, okay, whatever, it's not a big deal. But sleeping 5 hours per night for a week straight or consistently is going to considerably affect.
I remember, I think a lot about with the sleep is that if you have one bad night's sleep, you can get through, and you look at the studies where they have like the intention to give them a bad sleep, or it's quite a weird study, I'd hate to get part, but like they'll wake you up in the night or they'll put music on or something, so you intentionally have a bad night's sleep, but then like you can do things to get through that, so you could have a little nap. You like a nap, didn't you?
I actually cannot nap.
Okay, I love a nap. So yeah. If I've had a bad sleep, I'll have a nap. So if you've had a bad sleep, you could have a nap, or you could have like extra caffeine, and then you can probably get through that session. But when it becomes a chronic issue and it's like you said, repeatability of getting like a week or 2 weeks of bad sleeping, then you really start to see drops in your performance.
Yeah, I actually just when you said that it's a horrible study, I read into it, and because of that reason, there's not a lot of studies out there.
No, it's tough, isn't it?
People just don't want to be a part of it, and I completely understand. Like people who know me like from the gym floor and whatever, they know that I'm so religiously like getting my 8 to 10 hours of sleep. But
so if you have one bad night's sleep, you're probably going to have a very small effect, but you probably get through it if you do like the things to top it up. But it's the sleep deprivation over a certain amount of times where you start to see a few different things happen. You see your performance in the gym, both like force output, but also skill as well is massive. You see a massive drop in like...
I'm so glad you brought that up. And sorry to cut you off,
no.
But that's also something I read into, that it's literally not really going to affect your 1 RM of your bicep curl, but for lifts like a squat, a bench press, and especially if we're going into like Olympic weightlifting where it's even more skills goes into that, or if we're thinking about competitive athletes and, for example, football players,
fine skills of passing a ball, exactly.
It's going to be a massive thing.
So sleep is huge. So we're looking for, I mean, the general recommendation is your 6 to 8 hours, isn't it? If you're an athlete, I'd probably push it up to 9 to 10 if you can. And like you said, like that's going to, the sleep is the biggest one. Like I said, force output, skill, they're the big two, they're the big ones that you can really like see a good benefit to of getting your sleep. I guess then the second one would be nutrition.
I wanted to ask the question.
Go for it. Yeah, no, that's fine.
Do you have a nighttime routine? Let's talk about sleep hygiene just a little bit as well.
Yeah, do you know one rule that I really like, and it's actually the person who's the worst at like looking after themselves that recommended the rule, the 10-3-2-1 rule.
What is that?
So 10-3-2-1 is 10 hours you don't have caffeine before bed. It's 3 hours, I think it's eating, 2 hours drinking, and then the last hour no screens. And I try and stick to that as best as I can. I do have a bit of a sleep routine. I also have like the mask. We spoke about this the other day. I live in the city centre, so like there's lights and stuff. So I have the mask. I try and put my phone away the last hour. Last night I went on it before bed and I had a bad night's sleep. So I do really try and put my phone away the last hour. I try not to eat or drink too late. I'm a gentleman of an older age now, so if I drink if I drink too close to going to bed, then I'm up in the night getting up. So I try to cut back on the food and drink like a couple of hours before, screens an hour before, and then when I'm sleeping, I love the room to be freezing. I have the window open and then I'll close the window so I'm dithering, put the mask on, wrap in, and then I'm good to go. Okay. So I'd say that's my routine. Good. But people have these really like diligent things. What's yours?
Mine is a temperature 100%, sleep mask definitely. However, I recently bought this sunrise alarm clock. I don't know if you have that or you use it. it's a game changer.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, it's so good. So what it does, if you're listening and you're not familiar with it, it basically wakes you up a half an hour before you set your alarm to, and it wakes you up with a really gentle light.
Yeah.
So it comes on and then it just keeps coming on for the half an hour. And at the end of the half an hour, it makes a sound as well. Now you can change that into, you know, birds singing or goats making sound.
Goats.
Goats.
That's a bit different, but yeah,
I
whatever
don't
works.
know
Yeah.
I don't know who would use that. But yeah, and it's just, it makes it so much easier, especially during these winter months, to get out of bed, because it's still so dark when you wake up. So yeah, I love that.
Going slightly off piece, but that Huberman, he always recommends like getting some natural lighting as soon as you're waking up, and I guess it's like
before 10 o'clock at least normally.
Yeah. Interesting.
Okay,
So
we should do a whole podcast on sleep.
absolutely. So you got your sleep.
Yeah.
We know that's massively important now. Nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
Again, like, you know, one bad day of nutrition is not going to make or break anything. But again, like, if you're not eating sufficient protein, which we think is the big one, but also like if you're an athlete, sufficient carbohydrates and fats, like eating good quality sources of your carbohydrates and fats. It's funny because the fats is essential, the protein is essential, carbohydrates isn't essential to survive, but they're obviously really important from like a benefit of recovery, sporting performance. Yeah, exactly. So do you want to go in a little bit into one of the three, which is your favourite? What do you want to talk about?
I really like to emphasize protein because that's probably what the majority of the population doesn't get enough of.
Big time.
So I think we have gone on and on about the importance of protein on this podcast in previous episodes, and why you need that from obviously a muscle building perspective, from recovery perspective. I like to recommend 1.8 grams or 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight for people to aim for. That should be sufficient, and we could get into like meal timings and things like that, but I like to just hit the main thing, which is the amount.
I actually go slightly lower than you, but for myself I go higher. But I think 1.6. Like if you're like kind of recreational, you could the absolute lowest I would say is 1.2 grams per kilo that you weigh. But like realistically, to optimize it, 1.6 to 2.2, potentially a little bit more if you lean, potentially more if you like training a lot. But yeah, like Kitty said, this is really important in terms of like maximizing, you know, your recovery, your muscle protein synthesis. It's huge. You need to get sufficient protein in to really aid the recovery. And if you do have your lower protein, you'll probably notice session to session like an increase in DOMs, just overall soreness, and just a lack of ability to produce like maximal force. So like getting your protein in is a big one. Like Kitty said, like the main thing is hitting the target. I think after there, then you can start to look at like what's more optimal, potentially breaking it down to like 3 to 5 servings versus 1 or 2. But I think for most people, like they're not eating 160 grams of protein in 1 or 2. You're eating it in 3 meals. It's probably more ideal. But yeah, so eating sufficient protein. Are you massive in terms of like getting protein serving post training?
To be honest with you, what I really like to do is just distribute the amount of protein you consume in a day into equal amounts. So if you're having 5 meals, I don't know, then have the same amount of protein. I think that's probably my next building block, if that makes sense, instead of kind of timing and whatnot. I think that's a little bit more nuanced again. But obviously the kind of fitness industry makes you believe with the protein bars, protein shakes and whatnot, that's super essential.
You're sponsored by Optimum Nutrition. You should be saying gold standard whey post workout.
Yeah, I should give a shout out to them. I should actually have like a drink in here.
You should get the big bottle.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not gonna make that effort, but yeah. What do you think? What do you recommend?
I recommend it post workout purely from like, you look at like, you got to get 1.6 grams. If you weigh 80 kilos, that's like 100 and let's say 30 grams of protein. And if you're having it over 4 meals, like you got your breakfast, lunch, dinner, then the other ones, the obvious one is post workout. So I think it's just an easy way to top it up. I don't recommend necessarily a shake, but I mean, most people aren't going to bring chicken to the gym. They're going to just have a shake. It's just convenient. So I think if you're breaking it into 3 or 4 meals, I'd probably say have a shake post workout. is it going to max? I think it's probably better than not to, in terms of muscle protein synthesis. I don't think it matters too much if you're not training like twice a day or every day. Because the other recommendation would then be to have some carbohydrates post-workout as well, in terms of like recovering from there. But I think that matters more, again, if you're doing 2 a days or training super close to it. So moving into the carbohydrates then, like, what do you have any general recommendations for people from a recovery perspective for carbs? And what are the benefits of having carbs? I guess?
I'm actually, I haven't really thought about that in terms of a recovery perspective.
I'll take it.
Yeah.
If you, I think carbohydrates are super, if you're doing any kind of, high intensity effort, or even like long-term stuff as well, like, having sufficient amount of carbohydrates available for like fast energy, if you're doing like your strength sets or your sprinting, etc. But then also for like your glycogen levels in general, carbohydrates is super important from that. So I think from like a long-term perspective, having your carbohydrate level fairly high, just to maximize the amount of glycogen that you're storing, but also the amount that you've got available for in the session is probably a good thing to do. Again, like from there, like eating a sufficient amount, it's hard to give a recommendation. Like maybe like, I don't know, 3 to 5 grams per kilo. Depending on what it matters so much depending on what sport you're doing, the amount of activity, etc. But eating sufficient carbohydrates so that you've got enough glycogen to get through your training sessions and then enough available energy for this training that you're currently doing is really important.
So have jelly beans before your lifting.
That's what I do.
And like Luke.
Everyone laughs, but it's enjoyable as well. I love it. It's my time for some like for the most of the part when you're having your carbohydrates, it's also a good chance to get like micronutrients in from your vegetables, your fruits, etc. But then when you're looking for like fast available energy, it's gonna be sweet.
I have cereal after my
I was
workout.
gonna say I have cereal is my other one. Chocolate hoops I've just bought from Lidl.
Or chocolate, the Rice Krispies.
Cocoa Pops. I alternate between Cocoa Pops and hoops. I love it. It always makes me laugh as well because I'm like, I get the same comment every time. I'll be eating my jelly beans, but why are you eating jelly beans? You're meant to be a strength coach. I'm like, shut up, man. I've got 3 sets of 3. I need my 50 grams of sweets. But yeah, so
I agree.
Yeah, and then the last one, I guess, would be like getting good quality fats in as well. That's more from like a hormone regulation, which we won't get too much into. But yeah, again, it's essential for well-being. It's essential for your performance. You need to eat your protein first, but then you need to make sure, if you're trying to optimize things, I think avoiding the extremes of high carb, incredibly low fat, or zero carb, incredibly high fat. As long as you're getting a combination between the two and you're getting good quality sources and use it as a chance like to get good quality foods in as well, that's going to really help your recovery. So
100%.
we've just said about Cocoa Pops, but we're not getting our whole day's carbs from there. You want to be getting like good vitamins, good minerals in. Your carbohydrates is a great chance to get that. You probably want to get some like good essential fatty acids, which is going to be good for like your overall joint health. It's going to be good for aiding the recovery as well. So I think it's important to get a good combination of those. And if you're seeing those and like minimizing the amount of shit food that you're getting into your diet, if you're trying to optimize things, like minimize the amount of crap you're getting into your system, and really try and get good quality foods and from good food sources is probably the best thing you can do.
I wanted to jump on there when you said good quality fats, etc. Because I looked into, and maybe we can move a little bit towards supplementation and whatnot. I looked into using fish oil. So there has been quite a lot of studies looking into its effect and again muscle recovery, DOMS, things like that. Now the research out there's just a lot of variability. Thank you. In terms of like the amount they supplemented with in the intervention and the different the exercise protocol, performance measures, things like that. But it seems that omega-3 fatty acids may have a positive impact on recovery. So a lot of the research recommends 1 to 3 grams per day, especially if you're not really eating any fatty fishes.
Any fat fish.
Any
Big fat fish. Did he say into why they think that would help?
They broke down like mechanisms and whatnot, which I would not be able to recite, to be honest with you.
No, that's fine. We'll link it in below. But it's just quite interesting, is it? Because when you think about optimizing recovery, you don't think of the fish oils. Most people recommend the fish oils from like I said, a joint health perspective.
This was completely new to me.
It's interesting. So I think the big ones, your sleep, getting your protein level, they're the big two. And then, you know, good quality carbohydrates and fats. If you want to take it up another level, we're talking like the small percentages there, aren't we, the officials? But, you know, if you're trying to optimize things and you're still going to be recovery, it's definitely not going to harm. They're also not expensive.
Yeah.
And they're available everywhere. You can get them at bloody Asda. So you haven't got to go like a specialty and spend a lot of money on it. So yeah.
Because when you're looking at recovery strategies, I think you want to look at something that's efficient, quick, not too expensive, things like that, and it's not going to harm you yourself.
Exactly. And I think like you want to go well researched. And if you know, the most well researched ones are like your protein, your creatine, which but also your fish oils is like, it's quite new to it, but like there's no harm in taking them, and they're relatively cheap. It's not like, oh, it might be beneficial, but it's £50. It's a very small amount of money, I think. So,
do you want to jump on to talking about creatine a little bit?
Go for it.
So in terms of like amount, I would probably recommend 3 to 5 grams per day from a recovery perspective. And that's just, creatine is actually not one of my favorite, but probably my favorite supplement that's most well researched. Like, it's so solid. So it speeds up recovery time between bouts of intense exercise. So
am I right in saying as well that it seems to be like intraset as well? Be able to push a little bit harder during that set as well.
Yes, 100%.
Which isn't recovery, but like it's gonna aid the training.
100% lost force production between the sets, definitely.
The interesting thing, I don't want to turn it into a creatine podcast, but like when you start to go down it, like the people recommend taking it just for like general health as well. It's huge for like brain health, and I think I might be correct in for dementia people with dementia. I got my nan on it.
You did?
No, it's too late. Rest in peace. No, she's not dead. She's just got dementia. Sorry.
Sorry, I shouldn't be laughing.
But yeah, like in terms of like just for general health, and again, it's super cheap. You can get creatine in your diet, but I think everyone, or the majority of people, should be taking. It's funny. I love the idea of it, and I don't feel any better on taking creatine V now. But I still go through a period of taking it because it's super cheap. And I do know all the research behind it, but I don't feel anything from it.
Same.
I love creatine.
I love creatine. I just don't really know.
I always tell us that when I was like 16, 17, I was just getting into training, and I used to buy like the bodybuilding books. And it was always creatine. I didn't really understand what creatine did. And I used to go swimming at the time, and I remember like I was a decent swimmer when I was a kid, and I was getting back into it, and I could only swim like 2 lengths without getting out of breath. I took 1 scoop of creatine and I went swimming, and I did 50 lengths without stopping, and I was like, this shit is the bomb. So there's this psychological component to it. It's like, this is insane.
So yeah, take your creatine.
Cool. So yeah, they're the big ones that everyone talks about when you're talking about your recovery. So then if we move into like your actual training and what you can be doing to be proactive in terms of like managing your recovery, managing your training. If we start a bit with like on a global scale, your macro cycle, and then we'll go down into like the weeks and the months. I think with your macro, especially if you're a competitive athlete, if you're just general population, you probably don't need to do this. But if you're a competitive athlete, having a period of time after like your biggest competition, it's probably a good idea to have like a recovery period. And that doesn't mean like doing absolutely nothing, but it will be like reduced training volumes, reduced intensity, with just the overall goal of just facilitating recovery. For a lot of people, your general populations, like you don't really need this because it's the same with deload weeks. Your life will just deload for you. Like you'll go on holiday for 2 weeks. That's your recovery. Or Christmas comes, you have 2 weeks off. That's your recovery. You don't need to be like, okay, I need to recover from my hard month of training. I'm having 2 weeks off. But if you're a competitive athlete and you're working towards like a big goal, your intensity spiking up, or if it's like marathon running, your volume spiking up, it's probably a good idea after that to have like as much time as needed to fully recover, you know, reduce the aches and pains, also just like get yourself back to a point where you're able to perform well. Having like 2 to 4 weeks, let's say 1 to 4 weeks after a competition to recover is probably a good idea.
So whenever you're prescribing this to athletes, what is that you exactly, not exactly, but what do you change in that programming? Does that mean that there are specific recovery days where you would just be, I don't know, you're doing something cardiovascular or
Sure.
foam rolling, or does it reflect in the training?
I think if you're doing like a recovery training block, you need to still be doing the training that resembles what your sport is. So if you're marathon running and you've just done a hard marathon, you're not going to have 3 weeks of just foam rolling. You'll probably be doing some very, very low intensity light running. But I think like when you look at the difference between the training and recovery, the recovery, the aim is just to get yourself back to a position where you're able to perform as well as you want to, while if you're training hard, like it's working towards that goal already. So it's just differentiating between the two. Obviously the most people I work with are powerlifters, so if you've done your biggest competition, I normally recommend having a week off training, or a week off structured training I should say. So if they compete on the Saturday or Sunday, they'll probably take off till Wednesday, and then from there it might be like 1 or 2 very light sessions. I'll normally say do whatever you want to do, have a bit of freedom, but don't go above 70% of your 1 rep max.
That's mentally as well, isn't it?
The mental break is probably more important than the physical break at that point, because you're following a structure and it's quite a monotonous thing, and it's the same with like running miles and miles. It gets monotonous, man, and you need that little bit of a break. So if you're like doing a marathon running, you might go to the gym still because you want to, you know, it's good for you, you feel good for doing it, but you might do some work on the bike, or you might do some rowing, just something that's a little bit different, and not pushing it too hard. Like I guess if you're doing running, your recovery days are like you're still able to talk, you're not battering yourself, you're still able to like go and do whatever you want after. You could still hold a conversation, just super low intensity, lower volume training. If you look at
sorry, you carry on.
If you look at like your old school like linear periodization, where it goes from like your sets of 20 eventually working to like your sets of 1, I think the sets of 20 like is probably, they had that in just as the recovery stuff. Like it's like 50% for 20 reps, like it's not going to do in for your 1 rep max strength, but it's probably from a recovery, allowing your joints and tendons to recover, allowing your body to get back to a point where you're able to optimally perform. That's probably why it was in. So I think like when you've got your training, if you're an athlete, just having look like with the rugby, like once you've done your season, their first couple of weeks they're doing very, very low work. If they're going to the gym, it's to recover, it's not to try and push on.
And we had this conversation yesterday on Barbell Club, slightly, where it's good to do different type of movements as well, because you just said that you love doing basketball, and it's kind of just a fun element, but you're still moving. It's not like strenuous from a physical perspective. So again, it's just adding that variation to
big time. So like if I've done a powerlifting comp, like the next week I might do 1 or 2 gym sessions instead of 4, but I'd probably still continue doing the basketball because it's very light. It just gets, like I said, gets me moving, gets me some sunlight. It's a good thing to do. Having periods of there. Then if we go a little bit closer into it, you've got your actual blocks of training. So like it might, let's say the average block is 4 to 6 weeks. You've got your intro weeks and your deloads, and we utilize these a lot. Again, if you're not really competitive or you're not like fully regular in the routine of the gym, I don't think you need to deload, because again, life will deload you. You'll have a week where you're at work and you won't be able to get to the gym, or you might only get there once or twice rather than 3 or 4 times, and that's almost your deload. That's your drop in your frequency, your volume and intensity. That's enough of a drop to probably allow you to start training again. But if you're in the gym like every single day, or like 4 times a week, or whatever, working towards your sport, having periods of training where you're deloading and having an intro week is probably a good idea.
100%. How frequently would you do this, in terms of like programming perspective? Is it 3 weeks on, 1 week off, or...
I think it varies on the person. So we like to use like a time to peak model, which is like if you're working towards something, like we use the Barbell Club for an example, on the 4th week they're walking towards like a heavy triple. It might be for some people that like they'll do like an easy week 1, then week 2 will be a little bit heavier, week 3 will be a little bit heavier, week 4 will be a little bit heavier. Maybe they won't be able to go much heavier into week 5. They've kind of reached that peak of that training block. You'd have a little bit of a deload. So you might hold the intensity and drop the volume down. There's different ways to deload, but one way, there's some kind of a reduction in there to facilitate the recovery. Because at that point, your fatigue's pretty high, your performance is high. You want to maintain the performance while drop back on the fatigue. So that's when you drop mainly the training volume, but also maybe the intensity. My general recommendation is dropping the volume by like 30 to 50%. So if you're doing if you're doing like 4 sets, you drop it down to 3 sets, or you might drop it to 2 sets, but you're dropping the intensity from, let's say, 100 kilo for 5, you might drop it down to 90 for 4. So it's a very easy set compared to what you was doing, but it's only 10% down in the intensity. So I think it depends, like, over your training. If you're keeping good notes, you should be able to realize like when your peak performance is. So you might train, it might take you 6 weeks, it might take you 3 weeks, it might take you 5. You'd find that individual response to that, and then once you reach that, you'd probably deload that week, and then you can use that then to make up your timeline.
And I guess it also depends when we're talking about like competitive athletes. Depending on their sports and seasons and whatnot. It depends on that as well, not just.
Exactly. That was literally like powerlifters or weightlifters would have that time to be. If you're doing rugby, then again your deload, or team sport, sorry, your deload's just going to happen wherever the games fall, and it's a bit less out of your control. You'd be taking deloads when you haven't got a training game. But yeah, like if you're just talking about in the gym and you're enjoying your strength training, you probably want to take a deload once you've reached that high level performance. Take a little bit of a reduction and then go back in. And that's when you use the intro week as well. I think the intro week's similar to a deload, where it's like lower intensity, but it's more kind of getting yourself set up for the progression of the next training block. The deload's just fully to recover from the block. The intro is to kind of set yourself up for success in the next training block. So if you've got new movements, or you might be moving from sets of 5 to sets of 8, you want to just get kind of used to that, and then you can use that then to stepping stone into your progression weeks. So you should definitely be utilizing them if you're a competitive person. Or if you're really diligent with your strength training. Like I said, if you're general population and life's tough, you got family, you'll just naturally have deloads as and when life throws them at you. So, but yeah, that's kind of the meso. And then the last two, the microcycle. Do you want to talk about like your higher and lower days?
So what we were kind of talking about is that it's a good idea to vary your training in terms of having a little bit higher intensity or higher volume session, and then move into a lower one, just so you have a little bit of recovery, or actually if you are splitting your training into an upper or a lower split, again, that's a good idea to do upper lower, so you've got a little bit of more recovery there. What do you think?
I think it's super important. Regardless of what your sport is, you'll have days which are more of a priority than others, and you kind of want to set your training cycle up in a way that prioritizes the days that are the priority. So if you're a runner, you might have like your biggest run on a Saturday because you've got a bit more time to do it. I'm probably saying then that the session before is going to be a little bit shorter. It's going to be a bit lower intensity, so that would be your low day to then set yourself up for a really good high day on the weekend. You don't want to have easy high. You don't want low high. That's going to set you up for a bad second high session. Ideally, depending on what the rest of your week looks like, you probably want to go low high, or whatever it falls. You might have a medium day in there, but I think just alternating between higher stress days and lower stress days is probably a good thing to do if your schedule allows it. And it's the same with, like you said, your upper body and your lower body. For most people, the lower body days are going to be more strenuous than the upper body days, so you'd probably go upper lower. It's common sense rather than going upper lower. So just trying to set your training cycle up in a way that allows the most important day to be the most important day, and then use your other days kind of to proactively work around it as best as you can. And then the other one is your recovery days. You love a recovery day. bit of yoga.
I've been having recovery days for the past 2 weeks.
Your life is a recovery day.
I know, at the moment.
You sleep in 12 hours. You've got your little lamp.
I've got my lavender oil.
Oh, what a treat.
I know, my sleep tea. I'm that person.
That's lovely. That's lovely. One of my little pet peeves is people with their recovery days saying, what can I do on my recovery day to further improve my recovery? And the answer normally is to not do anything. It's just to relax. Do whatever you enjoy. Have a nice relaxing walk in the countryside. Play the Xbox if you want to play the Xbox. Watch TV. If you want to go for a little walk, or if you enjoy going to yoga, fantastic. But I wouldn't be thinking, it's my recovery day, what do I need to do? I would
how do I
maximize my recovery? Because the answer for a lot of people that are questioning how am I recovering enough are already doing too much. And if you're already doing too much, then you've got your day to recover. if you add more stuff into there,
Yeah.
you're not really optimizing the recovery.
purpose.
Yeah. So like if you're talking about your low high days, say you train 6 days a week, and that's
Mm-hmm.
when you're starting to try and thinking about your recovery. You're going low, high, low, high, low, high. Recovery day.
Yeah.
You don't want your recovery day to be another low day, and then it starts to bleed into next week, and you
Yeah.
still feel pretty bad. So ideally, you're just trying to minimize what you do on that day. Like I said, if you enjoy yoga, go to yoga, but don't go to yoga if you don't enjoy it. Like
Yeah,
go to it because
yeah.
you want to go, not because you think it's good for your recovery.
Yeah.
Don't
Or
go
to a session that's like super hard, like you're holding postures for so long and
Yeah,
whatnot.
yeah.
Like
Yeah,
it's, again, defeats the purpose of it.
It's like swim. If you want to go for a swim, a lot of people love going swimming for their
Yeah.
recovery day. Fantastic. Don't go and race someone next to you.
Yeah.
Or don't go swimming if you fucking hate swimming. If you hate swimming, don't go swimming. Go swimming because you want to go swimming.
Yeah, exactly.
What are your favourite recovery protocols, Kitty? What do you like doing?
I like what we've just spoken about. I do have some people recommending, getting a massage, foam rolling, things like that. I see you doing that as well, using. I don't know if you use foam roller for your recovery days. Little bit of mobility.
Yep.
I like doing things like that just so you're still like moving and it facilitates recovery maybe slightly better, but
I think, when I said like don't do anything, I think sitting on the sofa all day, when you come back to your next training day, you're not going to feel that good. So a little bit of movement is probably a good idea. I guess just not overdoing it for the sake of overdoing it is a good recommendation. But my recovery day, I have a Tuesday before my big Wednesday session. I'm in the gym, I'm doing some light foam rolling, some very, very light cardio, and then just some general movement, some like rotational stuff. And that complements the sessions nicely, but there's nothing like I'm hardly breaking a sweat. My heart rate stays the same. So I think just keep recovery the focus rather than just adding extra work into your recovery day because you feel like you probably should do something.
Yeah. And I wanted to bring in one thing over here because there's quite a lot of research out there about cold and hot water immersion and things like that. And there was a recent research, I think it was like 2022, about hot water immersion and having hot baths, because there was quite a lot of research out there about cold, and you hear that a lot, that you have to go to an ice bath or whatever, just to facilitate recovery or whatever. But actually, they found it that the cold water, it doesn't have a beneficial effect on it, especially long term. So if you do it consistently week over week, it can have a negative effect on muscle hypertrophy.
It blunts the I forgot the word.
Yes,
but
it does.
It blunts something.
It blunts
information process.
Yes.
It blunts information. Because you see, thank you very much. Just needed a second to
done.
gather my thoughts. You see a lot of people doing like the ice bath, like post session, and I quite like it if you've got something straight away. Like if you're in a game, if you're a soccer player and you've hurt your knee, you ice your knee, and you get back into it. It allows you then to get back into the training game. But if you're doing that continually over the long term, like you said, it's going to blunt the I forgot the word. Inflammation process, which long term is going to blunt the muscle hypertrophy, which is probably one of the leading things for performance. So I think it should be used fairly sparingly. That said, again, like you see a lot of people now buying like the ice baths.
I know.
I love it. I do. When I buy, I was talking to Mark yesterday. When I buy a house, I'm having a sauna outside.
Oh yeah.
And I would quite like the ice plunge bath.
Yeah, I mean alternating heat and cold is a good idea.
One of my favorite dates. I went to Copenhagen. I went to a place Max recommended, actually, Hartman, called Copenhot, and it's a sort it's right on the sea. What's the sea in Copenhagen? Is it the North Sea maybe? Anyways, it's fucking freezing, whichever one it was. You went in like the hot tubs, you go in the sauna, and then you dive straight into the sea.
Oh, that's so
and it
cool.
was spectacular. It was amazing. I felt fantastic after it. I was doing bodyweight squats in the sauna. My legs felt great, but it was just great fun. I felt great for it.
That was, I think it was it not last year but the year before, I went to St. George's Park. Have you ever been there?
I haven't, no.
It's a really good facility.
Where is it?
I'm not 100% sure.
Okay.
I'm still not familiar with the area. Still, after 5 years. But we went there. It was like a university trip or whatever. And we done some like gym-based sessions and field-based sessions and whatnot with the S&C coaches there. And they have this facility where they have a pool. just a regular one for swimming and whatever. They have and then they have a cold one, and then they have one where there's a treadmill in the water as well, for recovery. So we've done a little bit of like hot and cold immersion and stuff like that. So it's quite nice. For recovery. But the recent research that I was actually bringing up, it was saying that 15 minutes of hot water immersion, so having a hot bath, that can facilitate recovery a little bit better. However, I have to note that it's 60 minutes following your training. So for example, if you have a hard session in the morning and you have a hot bath in the evening,
you're not getting the benefit.
You're not getting the benefit at all. So that's just an important one to know. But it's also very individual again. So you're not going to cause any damage if you try it. But it might be beneficial.
These things, like I love having a bath.
Yeah.
Like after a heavy session, I'll go and have a bath. So if you like having baths, have a bath. Don't force yourself to have a bath if you don't like having baths.
Same principle again.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. I think that covers pretty much everything.
Yeah.
I guess the last one I wanted to talk about is just like actually in the session. One thing I see a lot is people just not having long enough rest between the sets.
Yes.
Powerlifters are known for having too long for the ball part, but I had a client in the week doing descending sets, so going lighter each set, and it went from like 105 for 6 to 100 for 6 to then he had to drop to 90 for 6, and there's no way he should have had to drop 15% for his first set, and I think he's just not resting long enough. So I think like just think about what your goal is and then rest accordingly. A lot of the research that we look at is like coming away from like actually timing your rest and going off like a needs basis. So like when you're warming up, you don't need that long rest, you know, you just load the bar, you go. But then once you've done your heavier set, you probably need like a fairly decent amount of rest if you're trying to maximize like your recovery for your next set to be just as heavy. And then as you're getting tired, your rest periods are probably going to get a little bit longer as the fatigue starts to ramp up, and then when you're trying to prioritize maximizing the performance.
Sorry, when you're saying fairly amount of rest, what are we talking about?
So I think if you're doing hard strength training, I think north of 5 minutes rest is needed. If you're lifting decent weights. I'd time my rests a lot with the velocity tracker, and it's like 6 or 7 minutes. You know, you got to find the balance between like, you know, you've got a life, you don't want to be in the gym for hours, but like if you were trying to optimize everything and trying to get those top sets to be as good as you can, it's got to be at least 5 minutes. I think like stuff like your accessory stuff, like you know, your lat pull downs, your chin ups is like 2 to 3 minutes. But when you're absolutely trying to prioritize like a performance outcome of a strength set, 5 minutes minimum, for sure. And like people, when they get forced to do a rest period, like they might time. I see people time, it's like, right, I'm doing 3 minutes. If you've got a problem and you're rating 10-15 minutes, you should probably look to cut it down. But if you're only having 3 minutes and you're noticing that you're having to reduce the intensity, it might not matter that much in the actual set, but like the long-term outcome of having to drop your weight down of your training sets is going to lead to less muscle hypertrophy or less performance of your strength stuff, which is probably the priority. So I think just rest as needed for your training sets to keep your recovery high. It's going to be individual. For someone unfit like myself, it's going to be 7 minutes. For someone that's a little bit fitter, it might be 3 to 5 minutes. So it's just as needed, and also based off the amount that you're lifting. Like you look at like the oxygen debt, the more that you're lifting, the harder it's going to be to recover from. You know, that's why I need so much time. I'm just too strong, but I need that much time. It is. It's not to do with the lack of fitness.
No, it's
and the Cocoa Pops. It's
and the jelly beans.
It's the too much rest. So just rest as needed to keep your performance high. Don't reduce your weight down because you're trying to keep to a certain set. Rest as needed. Prioritize the training sets. And that's our takeaways on recovery. Would you like to summarize?
So we started off by talking about nutrition a little bit. So make sure you're getting your protein in. We talked about having at least 1.6 gram per kilogram per body weight.
To maximize muscle protein synthesis, 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein for sure.
Make sure you're having enough carbohydrates as well. We spoke about 3 to 5 grams, but very individual.
Depending on your sport,
Exactly. Make sure you're getting good quality fat in your diet as well. If you want to supplement with fish oil.
Fish oils. ZMA I was going to recommend as a good sleep in. Zinc and magnesium is a good one to help improve your sleep as well.
Yeah, 100%.
As needed. Aiming for north of 8 hours if you're a competitive athlete is massive for, again, muscle protein synthesis. Kind of links with the nutrition for that one, as well as regulating your hormones and keeping your cortisol down, which are the big things you're looking for from your recovery. And then with your training, it's having periods of time where you're recovering after hard bouts of competitions. It's having deload weeks after hard weeks of training if you need them. Obviously not taking them if you don't need them, or if you've had times where you've not been to the gym as many times as you want to. Try and organise your week so you've got your priority days and then lighter days in between them, and then in the session rest as needed. I think that's a good little way to finish.
That is. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for having me, Kitty. And we'll see you at the next one, guys. Any questions, let us know. We'll link the research papers in the description. And until next one, thanks very much.
See you soon. Bye.
Don't need that.
Yes.
Dude, that's nice. So, you would airdrop that entire video to me?
Oh, shit. What we're going to do when you're not here? How long do you reckon it was, Kitty?
Do stop this one.
Yeah.